Welcome to Unit 2. This is the second part of Promoting Competitive Employment, a training program for peer specialists. And this unit is called The Discovery of Recovery in Work. In this unit, we'll be talking about creating and using our most valuable tool, our recovery story. We'll be talking in this section, as I said, about our recovery story in relation to work, and as a tool that can support others to begin to think about the possibilities of work, to learn strategies to choose, get, or keep work, or to think about careers and dreams rather than just jobs. But why are we even talking about this new role for peer specialists? As we look at SAMHSA's 8 domains of wellness, we see that both financial and occupational wellness are slices of the pie, and yet these haven't gotten as much attention or funding. But this is a critical part of the pie, and it certainly deserves as much attention as the others. There's been a lot of emphasis on wellness in the past few years, especially in light of the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors report on healthcare disparities that found that people who are served in the public mental health system have higher rates of certain illnesses and tend to die at a younger age than what's just called the general public. These studies are fully consistent with another area of studies that deal with this idea of early mortality or dying before the general public. These are studies that have been done across the United States, Canada, Europe, and in other countries all around the world. These are studies related to poverty. And these studies, interestingly, link these very same illnesses that were highlighted in the Naschwitz study. They link the poverty to these illnesses. So it's not just imperative to people's sense of occupational wellness that we begin to think of jobs, or even for their sense of just a general financial recovery. But it's also because we really know that there is a link between this idea of poverty and health and illness and early death. So it's a much wider idea than just people feel better when they work. There are actually health benefits to working and to increasing your status financially. And there's a lot of reasons for that we don't need to go into. But understanding that there's a really big picture that go into the value of working, I think is really important as we think about the idea of this new role within the peer specialist field. The unemployment rate for people with psychiatric disabilities is about 80%, higher than any other group, even with disabilities. When our own national unemployment rate gets anywhere near 9 or 10%, it's seen as a national crisis. And yet these astonishingly high rates of unemployment for people with disabilities, and especially with psychiatric disabilities, hasn't changed all that much over the years, and there hasn't been the kind of outcry that you would certainly expect. At the same time, we know that about 70% have said that they want to work. And this is according to a study that was done before the idea of recovery was really taking hold, just general recovery. And so my guess is that if we were to do a study now, that these numbers would be even higher. As many of us know from our own experience, people who have received a psychiatric diagnosis can take in and internalize all those messages that say, I can't get there, I don't have what it takes, I'll always be too sick. Let's listen to a few people who have had those kind of experiences. So welcome, Bob. I want to thank you for being part of this exciting curriculum that we're working on. And I'm excited to hear some of the stories you'll be able to share with us. First, let me introduce you to the folks that are with us. This is Bob Raymond, and he works here at Recovery Innovations, and he works on the Recovery Connections line. Did I get that? I got that right. Mm-hmm. And I assume, is that sort of a peer connections line?
We are the point of first contact for the company.
Got it.
We take care of all the phones. We also handle all referrals for Arizona operations.
Yeah.
And we handle the connection to care calls for all of our recovery response centers throughout the country.
Wow, so it's a busy place where you're working. It is. So again, I thank you for being with us. And I know in our talking together that there have been times when you weren't working in a role like that, right? And so I wonder if you can take us back, maybe to even before you lost your work, and sort of what led to losing your work.
All right. Well, I had a pretty good lifestyle before mental health challenges came my way. Mm-hmm. I had gone through school, I had gone through law school and become a lawyer, mm-hmm. and I had my own practice in Newport, Rhode Island, and I was practicing law, and then things started to go downhill for me, as can happen when diagnosis happens for various reasons. And within a short period of time, I lost the ability to work. I became divorced and I became homeless. And I went from being happily employed and with family and a place to live to just being adrift in and out of hospitals and basically on my own.
How much of that do you think was directly related to sort of the emotional distress you were experiencing, and how much do you think that was related to reactions to your diagnosis or discrimination or stigma?
The emotional distress was a great part of it, definitely.
Yeah.
It made it difficult for me to function, made it difficult for me to work, but I was also being told that I wouldn't be able to work again. I was being told by the system that I was no longer employable, that I was just mentally ill, that I should just accept my diagnosis, get on disability, and that would be my life, and I better adjust to my new lifestyle.
Wow, and that's after being so successful. What what an incredible loss it must have been.
It was a punch in the gut.
Yeah,
it really was.
Yeah. And so you ended up really losing everything.
I did.
Yeah.
I lost it all, and basically took 10 years to reinvent myself to the point where 10 years I should say, to the point where I could even start thinking about working again.
Right. What were, right before you got to that place of I'm going to start thinking, what were sort of those beliefs about yourself or about the world or about anything that were telling you you couldn't work at all?
Okay, well, when every doctor tells you you can't work, when every case manager tells you you can't work, you begin to believe.
Right.
And so there were feelings of worthlessness.
Yeah.
I'm not employable, I'm not valuable, I can't have that role in society. And I was very down on myself, and it became self-reinforcing.
Right.
I would tell myself, you can't work, don't even think about it, you know you'll fail.
That's right, so it just becomes, and we go down, and no matter what we do then.
It's a terrible spiral.
It is, it's horrible, it's horrible. And so you said after 10 years, you just began to think maybe, what was that like, and what sort of shifted that? Because that's like a seismic shift.
It is a seismic shift.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, part of it was the paltry amount you get on disability.
Yeah. So sort of the shifting of what's more uncomfortable, is this horrible amount, or taking a risk for something that I think will be a failure anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that shift
exactly.
happened, yeah.
And do I want to risk losing my disability
Yes.
to go
Right.
back to work?
Right.
Fortunately, with programs like the Ticket to Work program,
Now, how did you find out about that?
I found out about the Ticket to Work program through my case manager, believe it or
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
They hooked me up with an organization here in Arizona called ABLE,
Yep.
Arizona Bridge to Independent Living.
Yep.
And they gave me the details about the Ticket to Work program and being able to test drive a job without
Right.
losing your benefits.
Right. So they dispelled that big myth.
They
I
did.
can't go to work because when I go back to work, I'm going to lose everything.
I had never heard about
Yeah,
that before.
that's right. That's
I
right.
had never thought that could be possible.
But, and interestingly enough, the Social Security work incentives in general
Mhm.
have been around since the late 80s. I actually used to work
Mm-hmm.
helping people figure them out way back in like 89. And nobody knew. It wasn't until the Ticket to Work came out that people even found out there had been work incentives in place. Yeah. So now this place, ABLE,
Mhm.
are they able to also help you walk through the process of using the Ticket to Work or using the work incentives at all?
Well, they were able to refer me to another agency
Okay, good. Yeah,
that did that kind of vocational rehabilitation.
yeah, yeah.
Triple R was the agency in my particular case, and they were able to walk me through the first step, get me to actually work on my resume for the first time in
Yeah.
10 years,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
practice interviewing.
Yeah. How was that for you to do those? I see you smiling, but I also know that's like those seismic step moments.
It was hard.
Yeah.
There was a large part of me that didn't want to do it
Yeah.
because I just truly believed I'd fail.
Right. Let me ask you this. What would it have been like if you had had a peer supporter walking that journey with you at that point?
Oh, it would have been so much easier to have someone who had been through that, who knew the ins and outs because they'd experienced it themselves.
Yeah.
It would have made all the difference in the world.
Yeah, just to hear that experience.
Just to hear it, to be able to share your fears with someone who's
Yeah.
probably experienced those same fears.
Yeah. And who gets it and who doesn't
Who
say, no,
gets
you'll
it.
be fine. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Who gets it? It makes all the difference.
Yeah, yeah, it does, which is why, of course, we're doing this, you know. So you began to shift your idea and say, ooh, just maybe, probably not, but maybe.
Just maybe.
And if nothing else, it's worth giving it a try because who can live on this Social Security? And I've
That's
got
it.
this support here. Tell us a little more what the journey was like.
Well, then the journey was like, let's see how I can really play this out as safely as possible.
Sure.
Well, Social Security says I can earn up to this much money without it counting as one of my 9 months.
Right.
So, let me get a part-time job or try to get a part-time job earning under that and see how I do.
Yeah.
So, I became a telemarketer.
Mm-hmm.
Not the easiest job in the world.
People hate you.
People hate you as a
Right.
telemarketer.
Yeah.
But I got to just sit in a cubicle,
Mm-hmm.
just me and the phone.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to interact with a big scary group of people all
Yeah.
at once when
Yeah.
I was first getting back into society.
Yeah.
Because like many people, I had isolated for so
Right.
long.
So it became almost like a learning lab for you
It
to
was.
say, okay, let's see what things I can sort of tolerate right now,
Mm-hmm.
what feels okay. Let's get used to like going someplace or
Let's test waters. Let's
Yeah.
see if I can do it. Let's
Yeah.
try it.
yeah,
And it started to work out, and I was doing okay
yeah,
because there was that separation. And then I was lucky enough to fall into an experience where I was offered a position as a loan processor for a branch of a mortgage bank.
Mm-hmm.
It was a small branch, just about 4 people in the office.
Mm-hmm. Which is more than the phone.
More than the phone,
Right.
but still not a huge environment.
Yeah, yeah.
I was on the computer most of the day, and I have a lot of computer skills, so I was comfortable there.
Yeah.
And it was the next step.
Right.
And I started growing there.
Yeah.
And that worked up until a point. And that point came when, as with a lot of people who are getting back into work, I had a rough day.
Mm-hmm.
And things weren't going so well for me. And I needed to take the day off. And my employer really didn't understand mental health challenges that well.
Mm-hmm.
And began berating me for having mental health challenges that caused me to take time off work.
Right, because of course none of his other employees ever get sick from anything, right?
From anything else.
Yeah.
It was just a totally different environment. And
had you tried to assert your ADA rights at all?
because it was such a small office, and he employed less than 7 individuals, the ADA doesn't apply.
That's right, no apply. Okay, yeah. So you
So
were
I
really
didn't even
vulnerable.
have any ADA rights,
Yeah, yeah.
and so I found myself quickly in an uncomfortable place,
Yeah.
and I quit the job.
Yeah.
Which was the best thing that ever happened to me,
Mm-hmm.
because I quit that job, went back to my house, started isolating again, and then a case manager said, rather than just have you isolating at home all the time, why don't you take these RAP classes? And I took these RAP classes, and I said to myself, hey, wait a minute, this RAP facilitator, I could be doing what she's doing.
Yeah.
So when I finished the RAP classes, I went into peer employment training.
Yeah.
And then I found myself in a place with people who understood the challenges that I was dealing with,
Yeah.
who understood what it was like to have a hard day.
Yeah. So tell me what some of those work challenges have been that you've been able to ride through because of the environment you're in.
Okay, well, first of all, there are the days when I suffered from depression, among other things.
Yeah.
And there are those days when you're just so depressed you don't want to climb out of bed. You can't stand the thought of even facing another day.
Right.
But here, they would say, oh, we understand.
Right.
And if you need to stay home, we understand. But why don't you try coming in? Because we've all had days like that.
Right.
And we can help support you.
Right. So right there you have peer support as part of your job.
Part of my
That's
job.
right. People that
there
they
are
know
peers
been there.
right there
Yeah.
helping me.
Yeah.
And that made it easy to come in.
Yeah.
And if I was having a hard time, it made it easy for me to talk about it with a coworker.
Right. Because you don't have that shame of
There's no
I'm
shame.
feeling this or Yep.
Because I would truly be humbled by the stories that some of my coworkers could share with me.
Yeah.
And because of that, I felt my confidence beginning to build. So I could deal with the rough days, the days with the depression, the days with the anxiety, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have a boss that would say, okay, you need 15 minutes to yourself, go take it.
Right.
Then come back and we'll get back to work.
Right. So you begin to learn those work skills
Yes.
to manage it
Mhm.
just because you were in a place that made it okay to learn them.
Mhm.
Right? Instead of them to come in knowing it or be quiet about it. And
No. I learned the skills on the job.
yeah. And that's great.
Mhm.
That's great. And I have to say, Bob, you have a wonderful, wonderful smile
Thank you.
and a sort of a twinkle in your eyes as you talk about that. And when I think of sort of that horrible homeless place up there in Newport, up in my neck of the woods, where it's much colder than it is down here in Arizona.
Oh, yes.
And to think of that, I think of other folks that are in that Newport place, homeless or at least hopeless, without hope that they can be, because like you, they've taken in the messages of who they can be, who they are, what they can't do. What would you say to them about working?
You can do it with the right skills, and there are people out there that will support you.
Yep.
And I will support you.
So anytime somebody needs support, they can just look for this video.
Come to me.
That's right, if nothing else, and see your face and your smile and that wonderful twinkle. It really is delightful. I love it. So I want to thank you, Bob, for joining us, and I think many of the points that you bring out are so important, and we'll be talking about that, about how do we overcome those beliefs that are so embedded that they can hold us there, and then how do we make sure, as we work with folks, that we help them be in those environments that keep saying you can, because it's not easy to remember that and to move forward. We need that around us to support us. So thanks so much, Bob, and it's been a delight, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
So as we've seen from listening to these folks, our belief and our ideas about what we can or can't have really impacts what our future looks like. And so we'll be thinking a lot about how we can really impact people's idea, because some of us have been lucky enough to find out that many of those messages have been inaccurate and that we really can have a different future. We've learned that in our own life, how to write our story with our own dreams, hopes, aspirations, wants, and desires. None of us are required to choose work, but many of us do so because it plays such a central role in society. We all get many benefits from work. There's money, of course, and for those of us who have struggled to survive on SSI or SSDI, this is a big value to working. But beyond that, it's also the idea of having a place to go and making social connections. There's also getting value, self-esteem, a sense of accomplishment and purpose. And many of us in our lives have found love at work as well. Some of our dearest friends come from work, and some of us meet our future partners within the work world. And so, given all of these benefits, and that so many people aren't working simply because they don't believe they can, one of the big things we want to do as peer specialists is create a buzz about working, about the possibilities, spreading the message of hope about work, as well as recovery in general. We want to let people know that they can have all of the dimensions of wellness, including occupational wellness. And there's no better way to spread that message than sharing our own story of occupational wellness. As we share our stories, these become stories that can let people know that I've been there too. I've been in that place of not believing in the possibility of work. I've been in that place where I know that my future is limited because I have a psychiatric diagnosis. I've been in that place that says between treatment and time and everything else that's happened, the door is really closed to me. It also lets people know that the whole idea is not the idea of simply going out and getting a job, but what we're talking about really is the idea of a journey of vocational and occupational and work recovery, and that it's a journey that starts in one place and moves on and moves on. And it doesn't mean that we might not be in a totally different place in the future, even if what we see in front of us is a place that we'd rather not start at. But it is part of a long journey, not just a journey that says, what can you do now and what are your limited choices? And okay, that's it. It's a journey that we can share of maybe when we were in that place, when we had to start at a job that wasn't our favorite, but it was a place that helped us learn things to move to the next step, and then to the next, and then to the next, because it is indeed a journey and not an event. Our stories also become a way to share tools that have helped us along the road, lessons we've learned, obstacles we've overcome, challenges we've faced and moved beyond. All of those little pieces that we've learned right in relation to work or school or picking careers or figuring out a direction or overcoming those messages that say I can't. All those little tools that we've picked up along the way, we can share in those stories as well. And of course, one of the most important things is to let people know that if they don't feel like it's happening today, that someday it will happen. We know that, and we know that from our own experience. And we're here to share that message of hope, to share that idea that what is today is not the dictator of what is tomorrow, that it can come to be. Stories are a wonderful thing. And I think that's why they're so effective, and I think that's why peer practice is so important, because stories connect to the heart. They bypass the mind. They bypass those messages. We're not telling people you should, you must, not even, sometimes not even you can. Sometimes it's much more effective to just tell the story of when I remember I couldn't either. But then this happened, and then I found out this, or I took this step, or somebody else told me something, and that changed me. And as we tell our own stories, they resonate in the heart of others. And that's the wonderful thing about sharing our stories. James Stevens, in his book, The Crock of Gold, wrote, "The head does not hear anything until the heart has listened. And what the heart knows today, the head will understand tomorrow." And to me, this totally encapsulates the gift of our story. From to the heart to the head, a wonderful way for that to pass. So we'll be talking a lot about our story, because that will be one of our main tools, just like in peer practice. Here we're going to also do the same thing, is to think about our story. And so let's take a few minutes and think about what are those things that we usually put into our recovery stories when we tell them. We think about important things like where we've been, where did it start, a little piece of what it was like. And then how did things begin to change? What happened to bring that along? What helped? Who said what happened? And then what tools did we use to create sort of an ongoing sense of wellness as we went into our early recovery and then moved further into our recovery. And always, of course, with our stories, with that primary purpose to inspire hope. And so as we begin to shift over and start to think of our occupational or vocational recovery story, it's going to be the same thing, except we're going to narrow the focus. Instead of our wide recovery story with all the parts of recovery, we're going to narrow it into sort of that work or employment or vocational or even avocational recovery story, that reclaiming of that part of our lives, but with those same factors. So now what I'd like to do is share my own vocational recovery story with you, going through those same factors just to give you an example. I was raised in a blue-collar home, a home of iron workers, and I always knew that work was just a part of life. It was an expectation. Around the house, we even worked, you know, and that was just what you did. And so I got my first job on my 16th birthday. It was the first day I could legally work. And I had experienced emotional distress starting at a young age. It was something that, for me, was actually just a sort of a way of my life. You know, it was sort of like I had emotional distress and you go to work. Those things coexisted side by side. In my house, it wasn't something that you would go to a psychiatrist for sure. You didn't do that. And I sort of just dealt with what I was dealing with on my own and did my my work thing. In fact, I remember when I was probably 17, and by then I was actually a pretty involved drug addict and was shooting drugs. And in the summer I was working at Kresge's. It's an old little 5 and dime store. And I worked on the grill, and I had needle marks on my arms, so I had to wear a sweater every day. And it's in a really hot, humid summer, and I'm sweating over the grill. And everybody's saying, you know, why are you wearing the sweater? And I'm just sitting there saying, oh, well, I have a little chill, you know. And so that was really that coexistence of incredible emotional distress, incredible, just not very good at my life right now, and yet going to work. That was the way it was. And then I went to and worked at a factory for many years. And as my 20s progressed, it became more and more difficult to keep work due to the emotional distress I was experiencing. Hospitalizations got longer, shame at work because I had to go out sick or come back from sick leave got deeper, and the messages about what I needed to accept about my illness grew more intense. By this point, I was in treatment. I had been, as I said, hospitalized, and I was just getting this message of really how ill I was. And finally, by my 30s, I gave up and I gave in. I accepted that I had a chronic illness, that it was actually lifelong illnesses, and that I had to get more involved in my treatment and had to keep my expectations realistic. And realistic meant things like limited, you know, low stress and things of this sort. Ironically, the more I embraced this idea of treatment only, focus on your treatment, get involved in your treatment, the sicker I got. What I didn't and couldn't really understand back then was what a critical role work played in my life. And this may not be true for everyone, but for me, it really was. I knew by the time I was 15 that I wasn't going to have children. And by 30, I knew that I wasn't going to get married. I even told my mother that it only seemed fair that she give me my wedding money and my wedding presents, given that I wasn't going to get married, you know. And she told me she never planned for me to get married anyway, so I didn't make out very much in that deal. But anyway, I knew these things, you know. I knew I wasn't going in that direction. And I remember when I was a little kid, I was probably only 9 or 10 or 11, somewhere in there, and sort of my image of myself in the future was of this woman in a suit, which included a skirt in those days. And I had this black briefcase, and the image, I can still see it as clear as day. It's a briefcase that you would have seen in the early 60s, you know, black and square with just sort of clips on the top of it. And that was my image of myself. I didn't realize what a deep core sense of that it was, but that was me. But I lost that little girl somewhere between day rooms, OT groups, making belts, and the Medline, getting my daily dose of many, many, many medications. in essence, I became a career mental patient. And that's my term for myself. That's where that comes from. That was the term I used for myself, was mental patient. And occasionally I would try to take steps back into my life, go back to school, go get a job, do things, and I would succeed for a little while. But after 6 months or a year, it would just erode again, and I would end up back in the hospitals, usually worse. And this only reinforced my idea of incapability, of limited life, of really needing to accept that I couldn't be more. Over time, I could run every group in almost every facility in the Boston area because I had learned to be a really good patient. But run my life, live in an apartment, deal with grocery shopping, those had all gone by the wayside. I fully accepted that I couldn't do anything worthwhile on my own. I would stay in that place for the better part of 20 years. Then 2 things happened, miraculously at just about the same time. After being in the same partial hospital program 5 days a week for 2 years, Medicare decided to stop covering it. And at the very same time, amazingly, the partial hospital decided that I was well and should be transitioned out in about 2 weeks. It was just an amazing coincidence of timing, I guess. So in an attempt to structure my time, which was the advice I was given on my way out the door, and as I was very terrified trying to figure out how I would even live, because all I knew was the inside of day treatments or partials or whatever, I started volunteering at this place that I had heard of but didn't know much about, called the BU Recovery Center. And in this new place, I heard the word recovery for the very first time. And I saw people all around me who were in recovery. All I did at first was just show up. I had no expectations of myself to be able to do anything of value. But interestingly people there didn't see me through the lens of illness. They saw me through the lens of a worker. They didn't see me as symptoms. They just saw me as somebody who might be a little nervous starting in a new place. And in a couple of weeks, I went from sort of the back of the classroom, where I figured I would sit and just hand out papers and not do much more, to sort of moving up to the front of the classroom to assist the other instructor much more. And then, amazingly, to step in front of the classroom. And it happened to be on a subject that I knew a lot about, the Social Security work incentives. And so I was looked at as a person with knowledge and value. And as this happened, I started to remember little pieces of myself being a person with knowledge and value. I volunteered for about 4 months, picking up little pieces of myself again along the way. And then I started to take a class in the master's program, something that was inconceivable to me just 4 months before. And then I took more classes, and then I enrolled in the actual master's program. And over the next 5 years, I ended up getting my master's. It was only a 2-year program, and at one point I was doing it full-time and still working at the center and doing a few other things, and totally overwhelmed myself. So I ended up bringing it back. And luckily, when this point of potential crisis came, I had new supporters in my life that didn't tell me I was probably decompensating and needed to increase my meds and decrease my involvement in life. Instead, these new supporters and I sat down and we thought about, well, what skills might I need that aren't strong enough yet? Or what supports do I need? All in order to increase my success, not to keep me from falling apart. It was a whole new focus. It was a whole new way of looking at things, and it was a much more natural human way rather than an illness way. And so I got over that hump, and I learned things about myself, and I slowed down my school, paced it at a reasonable pace, and as I said, at the end of 5 years, I graduated, which was a moment so incredible for me, walking across that stage and having my 5-year-old niece, who I adore, in the audience clapping for me. It was something that I never imagined could come to be. And then I went to work, and I started slow again and built up over time. And I was incredibly lucky that, I had a really in-depth knowledge of the Social Security work incentives. That's actually what I had taught at BU and what I had done at one point in my life. So I really knew them well. And so I took 10 years of using those work incentives before I let them go. And it wasn't about the money or even about the insurance. It was really about those beliefs that I had. It was 10 years before I believed I would not fall apart tomorrow and lose it all. It had happened before, and I had ended up homeless. I wasn't going to let that happen again. But piece by piece, it came together. And I could let them go because I knew in my heart and I knew in my head that I could do it. It had taken that long, but that was okay. And that's the wonderful thing about this idea of journey, is there is no time clock. We all go at our own pace, and that's the way it works. And it worked for me. And as I look at my life today, it's an amazing, amazing thing. I, do a program for certified peer specialists. I consult at different places in the country on peer specialist work. I'm doing this course 10 times wilder than my wildest dream. But it only came from step by step, one at a time. And I'm really glad that I get to share this with you, and that we all, who are doing this wonderful work of peer support, get to share our work recovery and vocational recovery stories with others, because the difference that it made in my life is beyond anything I could have imagined. It's the most important piece of my recovery, is my work recovery. So I thank you for listening. And I hope that showed you sort of what we think about with our vocational recovery stories. And if you look in your workbook, what you will see is that there's a place there where you can also begin to think through your vocational recovery story. I remember when I was first doing mine, and my first thought before I did it was, well, I do my recovery story all the time. It can't be that much different. And when I actually sat down to do it, I was amazed at how different it was. So I really encourage you to take time and think about these questions, where we've been, how things have changed, what helped them change, what tools we used, all of those great things, but just in relation to finding sort of our work self again. And I hope you find it to be as enjoyable a process as I have for myself. So as we look back of what we've covered in this section, we've really talked about how people want to work but don't believe they can, and most of us know that from our own experiences. And that, of course, our greatest tool is our work recovery story, and that we use the same factors as we do, but with a special focus on work, career, or occupational growth. In our next unit, we'll be talking about it's an inside job, and I'll leave you to think about what that might be, and I hope you join us for Unit 3. Thanks. Bye-bye.